The Walt Disney Story, From a Dreamer to a Legend. The Boy with the Pencil. Walt Disney was born on December 5, 1901, in a modest home in Chicago, Illinois. The Disney family wasn't wealthy, but they were filled with dreams and discipline. His father, Elias Disney, was a strict and hard-working man, often moving the family from city to city in search of better opportunities. His mother, Flora, was gentle, kind, and always encouraged Walt's imagination. From an early age, Walt showed signs of artistic curiosity. He loved to draw. He'd doodle on scraps of paper, the margins of books, and sometimes even the walls. One day, when he was just 4 years old, he found a piece of charcoal and drew a giant chicken on the side of their White House. Instead of getting angry, his mother smiled and simply handed him some paper. That was the beginning. In 1906, the family moved to a farm in Marceline, Missouri, a small, peaceful town surrounded by fields, animals, and railroad tracks. Walt would later describe Marceline as the model for everything I ever built. It was a town where time slowed down, where kids waved at passing trains, where neighbors baked pies for one another, and where little Walt could let his imagination roam free. Walt spent his days lying in tall grass, watching clouds drift across the sky. He imagined dragons and dancing cows and knights fighting over teacups. He made friends with the farm animals, especially a pig he named Rupert. When he wasn't helping his older brothers Herbert, Raymond, and Roy with chores, he was sketching. Anything he saw became a drawing: barns, cows, rabbits, or his little sister Ruth. One day, young Walt took his drawings and started taping them to the barn walls. He called it his art gallery. The neighbors came over to look. One of them laughed and handed him a nickel. "This is better than the fair," she said. That moment stayed with Walt forever. "I realized that if I could draw something that made people smile, maybe I could do that for the rest of my life." Paper Roots and Pencil Dreams. When Walt was 7, the family was forced to leave the farm. Hard winters and a failed harvest meant no income. They moved to Kansas City, where Elias bought a paper route. It seemed like a steady business, but it came with a price. Every morning at 3:30 a.m., Walt and his older brother Roy would wake up, bundle newspapers, and deliver them house by house, on foot and by bicycle. In the cold, in the rain, in the snow. Then, after the route, they'd eat a quick breakfast and go to school. Walt rarely complained, but he was always tired. He would often fall asleep in class, doodle instead of writing essays, and hand in assignments late. Yet one teacher noticed something remarkable in his drawings. She pulled him aside and said, "You don't just draw pictures, Walt. You tell stories with them." Thanks to her encouragement, Elias agreed to let Walt take Saturday art classes at the Kansas City Art Institute. There, he met real artists. He saw charcoal sketches, oil paintings, and live figure studies. He learned about perspective, shading, and character. His favorite lesson? Movement. He wanted his drawings to move, to breathe, to live. At night, Walt would sell newspapers outside the local cinema. Sometimes, if the ticket man was kind, he'd let Walt sneak in to watch the last 10 minutes of a movie. It was there that Walt saw his first silent films. No words, just moving pictures, music, and emotion. He was hooked. He rushed home, grabbed his sketchpad, and started drawing flipbook animations. A dog wagging its tail. A man tipping his hat. A pig dancing. He'd flip through the pages rapidly, pretending to direct his own silent movies. "I didn't know what animation was," Walt said later. "But I knew I wanted to make drawings come alive." War, ambition, and the first big risk. By the time Walt was 15, World War I had broken out. Roy enlisted in the Navy, but Walt was too young to join. That didn't stop him. Determined to contribute, He forged the year on his birth certificate and joined the Red Cross Ambulance Corps. In 1918, he was sent to France, just after the armistice. While most ambulances were painted with red crosses, Walt decorated his with cartoons, smiling soldiers, patriotic flags, even Mickey-like mice, years before Mickey officially existed. Fellow drivers and soldiers laughed when they saw his ambulance drive by. It didn't matter that the war was ending, Walt was already doing what he did best, lifting people's spirits through images. He sketched constantly during his service, people, places, stories. One notebook from this period was filled with over 400 small drawings, each more creative than the last. When he returned to the U.S. in 1919, he didn't have a degree or a plan, but he had determination. He got a job as an apprentice artist at Pesman Rubin Commercial Art Studio, creating ads for newspapers and magazines. That's where he met Ub Iwerks, a shy but brilliant draftsman. They instantly clicked. Walt had energy and ideas. Ub had precision and technique. The two formed their first company, Iwerks Disney Commercial Artists. It failed within a month. But they weren't discouraged. Walt got hired at Kansas City Film Ad Company, where he learned about cutout animation. He quickly saw that cartoons had power, not just for kids, but for everyone. He saved up and bought a second-hand camera. In a makeshift garage studio, he began creating short animated films he called Laugh-O-Grams, modern takes on fairy tales. Cinderella was now a flapper girl. Red Riding Hood drove a car. The Big Bad Wolf wore a business suit. The films were funny, clever, and full of charm. Walt formed a small team of young artists who worked for nearly nothing, just for the chance to create. But the money never came. Distributors delayed payments. Rent was overdue. His artists were hungry. Walt even pawned his suit and winter coat to buy film stock. And then, Laugh-O-Gram Studios went bankrupt. He was 21 years old. Broke. Alone. Again. So what did Walt do? He bought a one-way train ticket to California. In his suitcase, a few shirts, a camera reel of a short film called Alice's Wonderland, and a dream too stubborn to die. "I think it's important to have a good heart failure when you're young," Walt once said. "It makes you kind of aware of what can happen to you. Because of it, I've never had any fear in my whole life when we've been near collapse." From garage to greatness. Walt arrived in Los Angeles in the summer of 1923 with $40 in his pocket and a suitcase full of hope. Unlike the crowded animation circles of New York, Hollywood was still wide open, famous for silent films, westerns, and slapstick comedies, but not yet a home for animated dreams. He moved in with his uncle and quickly reunited with Roy, who had recently recovered from tuberculosis. They shared a tiny apartment and talked endlessly about possibilities. Roy was calm and logical. Walt was fiery and passionate. Together, they formed the perfect team. Walt began shopping around his Alice Comedies idea, a blend of live action and cartoon animation starring a real little girl inside a cartoon world. The concept was unusual and innovative for the time. After several rejections, Margaret Winkler, a New York distributor, agreed to a contract for a full series. And so, in October 1923, the Disney Brothers studio was officially born. The studio's headquarters was a garage behind their uncle's house. The furniture was secondhand, the lighting poor, and the resources limited, but Walt had something stronger than money: vision. They brought Ub Iwerks back from Kansas City. Together with a few young animators, they began cranking out the Alice comedies one frame at a time. The series grew in popularity. But as the animation industry matured, live-action inserts began to feel outdated. By 1927, distributors wanted fully animated characters, no actors, just ink and imagination. That's when Walt created Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, a playful, energetic, and charming figure with big ears and a happy-go-lucky attitude. Audiences loved Oswald. He became Walt's first real star. A rabbit lost and a mouse born. But success brought a painful lesson. In 1928, Walt traveled to New York to renegotiate the contract for Oswald. Confident from Oswald's success, he expected better terms. Instead, he received a shock. The distributor, without Walt's knowledge, had hired away most of his animators and had registered legal ownership of Oswald. The character Walt had created was no longer his. He was devastated, betrayed. On the long train ride back to California, Walt's mind raced. He had lost his team, his character, and his deal. But he hadn't lost his pencil. On that train ride, Walt began to sketch something new. He wanted a character with charm, humor, and resilience. A character that was unmistakably his. He drew 2 big ears, a button nose, round eyes, a mischievous smile. He called him Mortimer Mouse. When he showed the sketch to his wife, Lillian, she smiled and said, "Mortimer sounds too stiff. Why not something friendlier, like Mickey?" And that was it. Mickey Mouse was born, not in a studio, but in a moment of loss. Not out of comfort, but out of necessity. Walt rushed home and started animating a new short, Plain Crazy. Then another, The Gallopin' Gaucho. But without sound, they failed to gain attention. Walt knew he needed something bold. Steamboat Willie and the Sound of Success. In the fall of 1928, Walt and Ub produced a new cartoon titled Steamboat Willie, featuring Mickey Mouse and synchronized sound, a revolutionary idea at the time. They hired a small orchestra, recorded the music in real time, and carefully matched every beat to the animation. Walt himself performed Mickey's voice, whistles, squeaks, and laughs included. The short premiered on November 18, 1928, at the Colony Theater in New York. The crowd loved it. They had never seen a cartoon character dance, whistle, and interact with music. Laughter erupted. People clapped. Critics called it the future of animation. Mickey Mouse became an instant star. Within a year, Mickey was everywhere, on screens, in magazines, on merchandise. Children wore Mickey pins to school. Stores sold Mickey toys. Walt had gone from bankrupt to brilliant in just months. It all started with a mouse, he would later say. But in truth, it started with a heartbreak, and the decision not to give up. Building a brand, one laugh at a time. Following Mickey's rise, Walt expanded quickly. He introduced new characters: Minnie Mouse, Mickey's sweetheart; Goofy, the lovable klutz; Donald Duck, the hot-headed comic relief; Pluto, Mickey's loyal dog. Each had their own personality and style. Together, they built a cartoon universe where humor, heart, and imagination ruled. But Walt didn't stop with cartoons. He understood something deeper. That Mickey Mouse was not just a character, he was a brand. In 1930, Walt signed a contract with a company to produce Mickey Mouse merchandise, lunchboxes, dolls, notebooks, watches, even toothpaste. This was one of the earliest examples of cross-platform character branding in entertainment history. One product in particular, a Mickey Mouse wristwatch, became a massive hit. It sold over 2.5 million units during the Great Depression. For many children, Mickey became a symbol of joy in dark times. Walt used the revenue to reinvest in his studio. He bought better equipment, hired top animators, and started planning something no one had done before: a full-length animated movie. When he told his team about it, they were stunned. A cartoon? Over an hour long? No one's going to sit through that, one said. Walt just smiled and replied, "They will, if they care about the story." Snow White and the Dream That Almost Died. In 1934, Walt gathered his animators and made an announcement. We're going to make a full-length animated feature. A fairy tale. A love story. A story with fear, beauty, humor, and heart. They stared at him in disbelief. No one had ever done it. Animated shorts were 6 or 7 minutes. Walt wanted to make an 80-minute film. The newspapers called it Disney's folly. Bankers laughed. Even Roy begged him to reconsider. But Walt didn't flinch. He chose Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, a classic tale with emotion, charm, and magic. It took 3 years to produce. More than 750 artists worked day and night, creating 1.5 million individual drawings. They pioneered new techniques, multiplane camera, to create depth and perspective. Rotoscoping, tracing live-action footage for realistic motion. Color psychology, to enhance emotional impact. Walt mortgaged everything he owned. His house, his life insurance, even Roy's patience. As the budget ballooned past $1.4 million, Walt began showing signs of stress. He lost weight, suffered headaches. One night he collapsed at his desk. But he refused to stop. He reviewed scenes frame by frame. He worked with the orchestra on the score. He coached animators on how the Queen should glide or how Dopey should giggle. It wasn't just animation, it was cinema. The night the world believed. On December 21, 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered at the Carthay Circle Theater in Los Angeles. The audience included Hollywood royalty, Charlie Chaplin, Shirley Temple, Marlene Dietrich. As the lights dimmed, Walt sat silently in the back row, heart pounding. When the film ended, there was silence. Then a roar of applause. People stood. Some wiped away tears. A famous gossip columnist wrote, "Disney didn't make a cartoon. He made history." Snow White earned over $8 million at the box office, more than any film that year. It received a standing ovation at the Academy Awards, and Walt was later presented with 1 full-size Oscar and 7 miniature ones, a tribute to his Seven Dwarfs. With the profits, Walt built a new studio in Burbank, filled with sunlight, color, and creativity. The Disney studio was no longer a garage, it was a kingdom. War, strikes, and shadows. But success didn't last forever. In the 1940s, Walt's world began to shake. He poured money into bold new projects. Pinocchio, 1940, Fantasia, 1940, Dumbo, 1941, Bambi, 1942. Each film was artistically groundbreaking, but financially risky. World War II had begun. Overseas revenue collapsed. Walt needed a hit, but got a storm. Then came something he never expected, a strike at his studio. Animators protested for better pay, screen credit, and working conditions. Picket signs, megaphones, public embarrassment. Walt was crushed. He saw his studio as a family. But not everyone agreed. He once said, "I built a team. I didn't think I'd have to protect it from itself." The strike dragged on for months. Eventually, Roy negotiated a settlement. But the damage was done. Walt's trust was shaken. His warmth cooled. Looking for escape, Walt accepted an invitation from the U.S. government to travel through South America and create goodwill films. From this came Saludos Amigos, 1942, The Three Caballeros, 1944. They were light, fun, and colorful, but Walt's spirit wasn't in them. He missed stories. He missed magic, grief, family, and an idea with a castle. In 1948, tragedy struck. Walt bought a house for his parents. Soon after moving in, his mother, Flora, died from carbon monoxide poisoning due to a faulty furnace. Walt blamed himself. He had the house inspected. How could they miss that? He never publicly talked about it. But friends noticed a change in his stories. More orphans, more distant mothers, more longing for home. He buried himself in work. Cinderella, 1950, Peter Pan, 1953, Lady and the Tramp, 1955. Each film tried to bring back the wonder. But something deeper was growing inside Walt, an idea not just for a film, but for a place. Walt used to take his daughters to amusement parks. But he hated them. They were dirty, chaotic, and boring for adults. He once sat on a bench while his daughters rode a carousel and thought, why isn't there a place where parents and kids can have fun together? That question turned into sketches. Those sketches became blueprints. And those blueprints became a new kind of dream. A theme park unlike any in the world. Disneyland, the park that started with a bench. Walt didn't want to build just another carnival. He wanted to build a world. A place where stories came to life. Where every detail mattered. Where dreams weren't just imagined, they were experienced. He called it Disneyland. The idea sounded crazy to investors. Rides? Costumes? Castles? Walt was an animator, not a developer. Banks refused him. Even Roy had doubts. But Walt didn't wait for permission. He created a private company called WED Enterprises and started building in secret. He sold life insurance, borrowed against his home, invested his own money. When he ran out of cash, he turned to a new, unexpected partner, television. In 1954, Walt struck a deal with ABC to produce a weekly show called Disneyland. Each episode introduced one of the 4 themed lands: Fantasyland, Adventureland, Tomorrowland, Frontierland. It wasn't just entertainment, it was marketing genius. America fell in love with Disneyland before it even opened. To children across the country, Disneyland became a dream they could see on screen. To parents, it looked clean, friendly, and safe. Walt's face appeared every week, smiling and explaining how dreams were made. He wasn't just selling a park, he was sharing a vision. Opening day, chaos and glory. On July 17, 1955, Disneyland opened in Anaheim, California. It was supposed to be a limited event, only 15,000 invited guests. But more than 28,000 people showed up. Scalpers had sold fake tickets. TV crews tripped over cables. The day was a disaster by technical standards. Paint was still wet. The water fountains didn't work. Rides broke down. The asphalt melted under women's high heels. Walt called it Black Sunday. But you wouldn't have known it from his smile. He greeted guests, rode attractions, and waved from the castle steps. Because despite the chaos, something beautiful had happened. The gates to Walt's dream had opened. In the first 7 weeks, over 1 million people visited the park. Families drove across the country just to walk down Main Street or meet Mickey in person. Walt walked the park every morning. He picked up trash, listened to guests, adjusted everything he didn't like. He treated Disneyland like a story, one that was never finished. Disneyland will never be completed, he said. It will continue to grow as long as there is imagination left in the world. The magic of the details. Walt believed magic was in the details. He tested how far people would carry trash before dropping it, and placed garbage cans exactly 30 feet apart. He made sidewalks change colors to match themed lands. He studied lighting so that photos would always look good. He even hired a full-time gardener just to trim the topiaries into animal shapes. He called it plusing, the idea that you should always improve, even if nobody notices. If a window looked too clean, he'd dirty it slightly to look lived in. If a ride had a pause, he'd add music or movement to keep people engaged. If a guest had a complaint, he'd take it seriously, very seriously. He once overheard a boy say he couldn't see the parade. The next day, Disney ordered curbs to be redesigned to improve viewing angles. Walt didn't just want to impress people. He wanted to delight them. EPCOT, a city that never slept. By the early 1960s, Walt was already dreaming beyond Disneyland. He began designing a new concept, EPCOT, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. It wouldn't be a theme park. It would be a functioning city. Walt imagined driverless transportation, homes filled with automation, climate-controlled zones, a community where innovation, culture, and cooperation ruled. He called it a living blueprint of the future. To make it happen, he began secretly buying land in Florida, using fake company names to keep prices low. In total, he acquired over 27,000 acres, twice the size of Manhattan. The public didn't know what he was doing. But behind the scenes, models were being built. Plans were being drawn. Walt even filmed a private presentation to pitch the project to Florida officials and investors. He was all in. EPCOT would be his masterpiece. The clock begins to run out. In 1966, Walt started coughing more. He brushed it off. Probably just stress. But a routine scan revealed something worse, lung cancer. Doctors removed one lung. He returned to the studio, worked through the pain, smiled through the fatigue, but the illness spread fast. Walt was admitted to St. Joseph's Hospital, just across from his beloved studio in Burbank. Every day, Roy would visit. Animators sent drawings and jokes. But Walt didn't want sympathy. He kept talking about EPCOT. One day, he asked the nurse to move the TV so he could project his maps of Disney World onto the ceiling. "That's where the castle goes," he whispered. On December 15, 1966, Walt Disney passed away. He was 65 years old. His last words were about family, work, and what still needed to be done. The world paused. Newspapers across the globe printed tributes. Children cried. Artists wept. America lost more than a filmmaker, it lost its biggest dreamer. The brother who finished the dream. After Walt's death, the studio fell silent. People whispered in the hallways. Artists stopped drawing. Executives gathered with teary eyes and no plan. The question hung over everything. What now? Walt had left a blueprint. But no one had Walt's voice. His presence. His belief. Except one man. Roy Disney, Walt's older brother. Roy had always been in the background. He handled the money, the contracts, the risk. While Walt dreamed, Roy delivered. And now, Roy made a decision that changed everything. "I'm not retiring. I'm finishing what Walt started." He stepped out of the shadows and took the lead. Walt Disney World, a kingdom for his name. Construction on Walt Disney World continued in Florida. Roy visited the site often, walking with blueprints, correcting details, calling in reinforcements. He even changed the name from Disney World to Walt Disney World, so people would never forget the man behind the dream. On October 1, 1971, Walt Disney World officially opened. Guests were stunned. Everything felt alive. The castle stood tall and proud. The rides were smoother, bigger, and more immersive. The staff smiled with purpose. Roy gave a quiet speech, thanking guests, cast members, and Walt himself. A few months later, having completed his promise, Roy Disney passed away peacefully in his sleep. The brothers were gone, but their legacy had just begun. A company that became a world. After Walt and Roy, the company entered new eras. The Disney Renaissance, 1989 to 1999, with films like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. The expansion of theme parks around the world. Tokyo Disneyland, 1983, Disneyland Paris, 1992, Hong Kong Disneyland, 2005, Shanghai Disney Resort, 2016. But the company didn't stop there. In the 2000s, Disney began acquiring other giants. Pixar in 2006, reuniting with Steve Jobs and embracing computer animation. Marvel in 2009, bringing superheroes like Iron Man and Captain America into the Disney family. Lucasfilm in 2012, making Star Wars part of the Disney universe. 20th Century Fox in 2019, expanding into new genres and platforms. Today, Disney owns not just characters, but entire worlds. Streaming, gaming, education, cruise ships, television, Broadway musicals, Walt's empire became something even he could barely imagine. And yet, it all began with a sketch. A mouse. And a man who believed stories could change the world. Lessons from a dreamer. Walt Disney wasn't perfect. He was impatient, obsessive, demanding. But he was also kind, generous, and brave. He gave hundreds of young artists their first job. He comforted sick children in his parks. He personally sent letters to fans who felt alone. He knew the value of people and of possibilities. So what can you learn from Walt Disney? Mickey's design. How EPCOT saved the mouse. After losing Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, Walt returned from New York in 1928 with nothing but frustration and a sketch of a mouse. But Mickey, as charming as he sounded, was still just an idea. He needed to look right. He needed to move right. He needed life. That's when EPCOT stepped in. Was more than just Walt's friend. He was his creative engine, a quiet genius with an extraordinary ability to draw fast, consistently, and cleanly. While Walt imagined, executed. For weeks, worked in isolation, refining Mickey's shape. Circles, ears, proportions. Simplicity was key, because Mickey had to be easy to animate from every angle. Once said, "I just wanted to give Walt a character he could be proud of." When Steamboat Willie was ready, had drawn nearly every frame by hand, thousands of them. Walt gave Mickey a voice, but gave him a soul through movement. Their teamwork was never perfect, tensions would rise later, but without there would be no Mickey. Lesson. Every dreamer needs a builder. Great visions are born in partnership. The park through a child's eyes. On a sunny morning in 1956, a little boy named Michael walked through the gates of Disneyland with his parents. He was 6 years old, wearing a red cap, and holding a crumpled park map in both hands. When he saw Sleeping Beauty's castle, he stopped walking. His parents kept going, but he didn't move. "I thought it was real," he later said. "I thought I'd stepped into a storybook." He met Goofy. He rode the Jungle Cruise. He ate cotton candy and sang, "It's a Small World," until he lost his voice. That night, he sat on his dad's shoulders during the fireworks. As the sky lit up, he whispered, "This is the best day of my whole life." That story isn't famous. It never made headlines. But it's been repeated millions of times, by kids from every continent, in every language. And it's exactly what Walt wanted. Not headlines. Not awards. Moments. "I don't make movies to make money," Walt once said. "I make money to make more magic." Lesson. True success is measured in joy, especially the kind that fits in tiny hands. From Anaheim to the world. Walt never got to see Disneyland grow globally. But his dream did. In 1983, Tokyo Disneyland opened its doors. It was clean, efficient, and filled with Japanese cultural touches, but still 100% Disney at heart. Then came Disneyland Paris, 1992, with castles inspired by European legends. Hong Kong Disneyland, 2005, blending feng shui with fantasy. Shanghai Disney Resort, 2016, the largest, most modern of all. Each park took years of planning. Designers traveled the world. Architects studied local customs. Engineers created new rides. But the mission remained the same. Bring stories to life. In every park, children meet princesses and pirates. They laugh on roller coasters. They cry during fireworks. They go home with something bigger than souvenirs. Wonder. Lesson. Great ideas travel. But great values translate. More than a company, a culture of wonder. Today, Disney is a company. But more than that, it's a culture. Teachers use Disney films to teach values. Therapists use Disney characters to help children express emotion. Artists learn from Disney's color theory. Engineers study theme park logistics. Designers model merchandise around Mickey's timeless charm. In hospitals, Disney donates toys, screenings, and visits. In schools, it funds creative programs. In homes, it inspires children to dream beyond their limits. It's not perfect. It has critics. But it's one of the few global brands that unites people through hope. Because at its core, Disney teaches us that good triumphs over evil. That dreams matter. That kindness isn't weakness. That laughter heals. That stories shape our souls. And none of this started in a boardroom. It started on a farm, with a boy, a pencil, and a feeling that the world could be more beautiful. What will your story be? You've heard the story of Walt Disney, from drawing pigs in Missouri to building castles in California. From bankruptcy to billion-dollar dreams. From grief to greatness. So now let me ask you, what will your story be? You don't need to build a theme park. You don't need to create a mouse. But maybe, you have an idea no one believes in. You have a vision that doesn't fit the mold. You have a fire that won't go out. Maybe the world says, no. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you failed before. Good. That means you're just like Walt. All our dreams can come true, he said, if we have the courage to pursue them. So pick up your pencil. Open the door. And start building the first page of your own legend. Final lessons: 10 things Walt taught us. 1. Start small, but start. Even a barn wall can become your first gallery. 2. Never stop dreaming, even when people laugh. They called it Disney's folly. It became Snow White. 3. Let failure guide you, not stop you. Losing Oswald led to creating Mickey. 4. Surround yourself with believers. Roy, Lillian. Every dreamer needs a team. 5. Build for people, not profits. Walt walked his parks every day because he cared. 6. Don't just entertain. Inspire. He didn't make cartoons. He made characters that felt real. 7. Mix imagination with action. Walt didn't just dream of EPCOT. He drew it, planned it, and started it. 8. Turn pain into beauty. His mother's death shaped his stories. 9. Obsess over details. Because people can feel the difference, even if they don't see it. 10. Leave something behind. A name. A message. A smile that lasts beyond your lifetime. Walt once said, I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing. That it was all started by a mouse. But you and I both know. It didn't start with a mouse. It started with a boy, on a farm, with a pencil, a dream, and the courage to try. Thank you for listening. This was the Walt Disney story, from a dreamer to a legend. If it inspired you, share it. Tell your story. Subscribe for more inspiring stories. And always remember, it was never about the mouse. It was always about the dream.